Hey, good Wednesday evening, everyone. I'm KSLA First Alert Chief Meteorologist Jeff Castle here. A little First Alert weather extra. Talking tropics this evening. Of course, tomorrow, June the 1st, the official start of the Atlantic hurricane season, which runs through the end of November. And I know this is a topic that a lot of folks interested in heading into the summer months. A lot of times that's where most of our weather excitement here in the Arklatex comes from, is when there is something tropical to track. And of course, Louisiana, very prone to being impacted by tropical systems. Certainly here in the last 10 to 20 years, it has been devastating, to say the least, with some of the storms that have come on through it. Well, if you missed it at the end of last week, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, put out their seasonal hurricane forecast, what they expect for the 2023 tropical season in the Atlantic Basin, which includes the Gulf of Mexico, the Caribbean, as well as the Atlantic Ocean. So wanted to share with you that info and then talk a little bit about typically how hurricane season proceeds in the Atlantic Basin. Let's get to the numbers first. Again, this is the forecast. Named storms, 12 to 17 are expected. Out of those, 5 to 9 are forecast to become hurricanes, and out of those hurricanes, 1 to 4 could be major. Keep in mind, a major hurricane is one that is Category 3 or stronger. Remember, our classification of hurricanes go from Cat 1 to Cat 5. Cat 1s are the weakest, and Cat 5s are the strongest and the most devastating. So it does appear that we are going to have another active season. However, the last few years, we've been running above average on hurricane and tropical storm activity. The forecast for this year is actually right close to those averages, certainly within the range. 14 is the average number of named storms, 7 hurricanes, 3 major, so we are right within that range. So at least at this point in time, the expectation is that this will be a near average tropical season coming up. A lot of things go into these forecasts, the least of which has to do with how warm the ocean is expected to be. I will say right now, ocean temperatures are running warmer than average for this point of the year. That includes the Gulf, the Caribbean, as well as the Atlantic. So that's something you don't want to see, because keep in mind, these tropical systems, they derive their energy from the warm ocean water. So if you got warm water, and especially warmer than average water that these systems would typically form within and move through, that's bad news. The only mitigating factor, and we talked about this a couple weeks ago here on First Alert Weather Extra, was the expectation that we are going to be heading into an El Nino weather pattern. That's all determined by what happens in the tropical waters of the Pacific Ocean that can impact weather patterns worldwide. And one of the things that an El Nino type of setup will do is it does tend to suppress tropical storm and hurricane activity in the Atlantic Basin due to increased winds in the middle to upper part of the atmosphere, which sometimes can prevent or at least kind of delay or make it a little bit more difficult for these tropical systems to organize if there are strong winds aloft to deal with. So that may be a mitigating factor for us through this tropical season, but again, not the only factor. And so those warmer than average ocean temperatures may overcome that, but at least at this point, perhaps only an average season. All right, how do things normally play out here tropical season wise? Well, of course, we're at the beginning now, and if you look at the graph here, this kind of shows the trend throughout the Atlantic hurricane season. The yellow area is hurricane activity, and the red is hurricanes and tropical storms combined. And at least in June, and even into May, which we can sometimes get some tropical activity, there's generally not a lot. In fact, through July, generally speaking, not super active. Now, every couple of years, yes, we will get a system in the month of June. And every year or so, there's probably going to be at least one that develops in July. But in general, we look to August, especially mid to late August, September in particular, and even on into October for the peak of tropical systems, or tropical season. That's when we get the most activity out there. September 10th, if you kind of average everything out, that is the peak of hurricane season when we are most likely to see something out there. So again, we're early in the season right now, so we don't expect a lot of activity. But, of course, as we head into hurricane season, it's important to keep an eye on things. If you have a beach vacation plan, I know a lot of people, we get questions, say, I'm going to the beach, I'm going to the Gulf, going to Florida. Do you see anything tropical coming up? So that, of course, is something that is on everyone's mind this time of year. And again, especially with the history of devastating hurricanes here in recent years in the state of Louisiana, all eyes are on the tropics all season long. Here are the names for the upcoming season. We start with Arlene. We've actually had, though, one system that happened in January that the National Hurricane Center has gone back and looked at and determined that it was what was known as a subtropical storm, which means it had some tropical characteristics but wasn't 100% wholly tropical. So there actually has been one storm. Of course, at the time, we didn't realize it was tropical in nature, or at least had some tropical characteristics, so it did not get a name, but it will go down when we do get the next tropical system that develops. It will be number 2 on the season, and that one, of course, will get a name when it forms. Arlene is the first name on the list. That is what we will be starting off with. You go down the list here. I know a lot of people look to see if their name is on the list every year. Brett, Cindy, Don, Emily, Franklin, Gert, Harold, I believe that's Idalia, Jose, Katia, Lee, Margot, Nigel, Ophelia, Felipe, Renee, Sean, Tammy, Vince, and hopefully we don't get to Whitney. Again, based on the current forecast, we would not necessarily get that far down on the list. But those are the names that will be used. And just a reminder while we do this, the names, of course, you notice are alphabetical. Some letters are left out because some letters it's hard to find a name that starts with those letters. And they do alternate between male and female. And the whole idea of giving these storms names is because quite often there can be more than one tropical storm or hurricane in the Atlantic Basin at a time. So by giving them names, makes it easier to keep track of. And of course, if it ends up being a historic system, that name gets retired and is one that people will remember for many years to come. All right, early in the season, so we are talking June and July, these are the areas where tropical systems typically develop. And you can see the Gulf of Mexico right there smack dab in the middle. Parts of the Northwest Caribbean, we can get tropical systems to develop this time of year, as well as right off the immediate southeast coast of the U.S. So at least early in the season, these are the spots where we tend to watch for tropical development. And just a little weather info here. You know what? There is an area there in the Gulf, right where that bullseye was of the possibility of early season tropical development, that the National Hurricane Center is actually keeping an eye on right now. But they're only giving this a 20% chance of development. But an area low pressure in the northeastern Gulf, at least a low chance. Something may develop tropical-wise out of that. Again, the chance is pretty low over the next 2 to 7 days. So wouldn't be too concerned that we are going to see anything form in this area. But obviously, it is going to be something to watch in the days ahead. So right on cue, again, with the arrival of tropical season, we may have something that we are going to be keeping an eye on there in the Gulf of Mexico. Wouldn't sweat it too much, but if you had a trip planned to the Florida Panhandle, west or even the east coast of Florida, that'll be one to watch and may end up having some impacts on beach plans if, in fact, you are going to be traveling in that direction. Of course, throughout tropical season, you can stay first alert to whatever is going on right on the KSLA First Alert weather app. If you don't have the app, maybe you're watching from one of our digital platforms instead of from the weather app. The app is free. Find it in your app store. Just search for KSLA to download it. You get video updates, 10-day forecast, hourly forecast, current radar weather alerts, and of course you can track the tropics there all season long. Appreciate you tuning in this evening for this little First Alert Weather Extra. We will be saving this. It'll be on our website just in case you want to share it with anyone. Just look for it there on the News 12 Now section at ksla.com. Appreciate you joining us. Hope you have a great rest of your Wednesday evening.